Hello, everyone. This week on Around the Coin, Faisal, Brian, and I had a dedicated podcast where we dug into Carl Icahn's history. He had some recent public announcements giving Apple advice, calling the separation of PayPal and eBay, which looks like it's going to become a reality. We talked about that first. Then we got into Brian's answer and Faisal's answer to Marc Andreessen's quote in Twitter storm about the earthquake to hit the financial markets, essentially saying that the next 3 years are going to result in more disruption, more change, more effective increase in its user experience than the past 20 plus years combined. We delve into, Faisal gave us an interesting perspective into Russia and Serbia, both banning Bitcoin. Faisal very bearish on the opinion of Russia and essentially claims the decrease in value of the Russian currency, not based on Bitcoin, of course, but based on issues pertaining to Ukraine and other political affairs. Really interesting to hear his perspective in that part of the world. Lastly, we dug into a bit of the future of Apple Pay, the future of what payments would look like, particularly by visiting Disney World. Brian went on a trip with his family and apparently with his consulting group, which we don't get too much information about, but he did some really interesting research there, took some pictures, wrote an interesting Quora post, and told us all about that. So if you have any feedback, please leave it in the comment fields. And as always, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy. All right, good morning. We have Brian, myself, Mike here, and Faisal on the show this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You guys doing well, I see. Yep.
Yes.
Thank everyone for listening. Definitely want to request more questions as we go forward. As a constant reminder, we are very open to any suggestions on topics or opinions that we could address, anything on the show from listeners who want to give our feedback on. Today we'll be covering a bit of Carl Icahn. Brian, do you want to give us a little background here?
Carl Icahn. Well, those familiar with the movie Wallstreet might think that is just a theatrical, presentation. But the main character, Michael Douglas, Gordon Gekko character, was actually pretty much stylized on Carl Icahn. It was back in 1985, and Carl decided that the airline industry was very inefficient, and in some ways it was. And he went about a hostile takeover of TWA. And essentially what you do in a hostile takeover is you secretly start accumulating shares. In a legal sense, you report only when you have to. And when you get enough shares, you essentially write the letter to the company saying that you want a board position or you want a proxy. And so that's one thing. The next thing he did was something called asset stripping, where in fact it was a leveraged buyout. He wound up getting money from junk bonds. This is the Michael Milken junk bond era. And he used that money to help acquire not only this company, but Western Union, Phillips Petroleum, Texaco. It goes on and on a list of this, RJR Nabisco, and there's a movie about that. So basically, they sell assets that are prime assets to help underwrite the amazing amount of junk debt that they have to accumulate. That's how Carl, really cut his teeth in the 1980s, so much so that obviously movies were dedicated to him. It's a good and a bad thing. It's like whenever we look at an ecosystem and obviously finance is a big ecosystem, there's going to be predators. There's going to be, those predator birds that come in and pick the carcasses clean. There's going to be the lion that takes out the weakest gazelle, and it's going to not look so good. And this is not to say that I'm a supporter of Carl Icahn, in his past. I really think that the downside to this is that there's absolutely zero consideration of the people that are actually making a living as an innocent employee of these companies. From one level, of course, he's liberating value to shareholders, and yes, ostensibly that's a good thing. But on the other side of that, people who have dedicated their life, like at U.S. Steel, he had, people have been working at the company for 25, 30 years, 3 generations, and he just decimated the company to the point where almost all steel production is now in China. I don't know in the United States. I don't know if that was his game plan, but the end result was he helped decimate the U.S. manufacturing economy. Moving into today, we have a reinvigorated Carl Icahn that started to come out in the spotlight to the tech world with Yahoo, and then, of course, now with PayPal, eBay, and Apple. And Carl's essentially doing exactly what he did throughout his career. He's finding companies that have intrinsically higher potential shareholder value by, event X, Y, or Z, and trying to force these events. In the case of PayPal, eBay, they're very logical. Now it seems extremely logical, but for some of us in payments, we always thought it was logical for the two companies to be separated. I think synergistically they would be much more valuable. And so Carl basically did the obvious. And then we have, that letter that went out a couple of months back, and everybody said, well, no, thank you very much. That's probably not going to happen. And that's when David Marcus was there. And this last couple of days, we didn't have a chance to talk to this subject last show because it didn't happen yet, so we kind of skipped it. But this became a big news event, and it really looks like Carl Icahn prompted this. And I could say that there's a good chance he did.
So you think he contributed to the actual event occurring, or he just called it? Really?
Yeah, I think by writing the letter and putting the force of the investor community, you have to remember the people that are investing in eBay now in massive quantities are these large funds. These are funds that have a tremendous amount of control over these companies ultimately.
So we're not talking about just any investor here in PayPal. Carl has, I see his net worth is $26 billion.
Yeah.
And it seems like he accumulated it much in the same way that Warren Buffett did, right? And just investing in long-term holdings.
Yeah, but a lot of it is asset stripping and just essentially going into a company and using any way to try to become an activist investor, corporate raider, hostile takeover. I mean, however you would want to term it. He's doing it. This is going on with Darden restaurants right now. It's the great piece that was written by I think he was 23 years old. An incredible slide deck about how bad Olive Garden had become as a restaurant in the United States. It's called the Breadstick report. And this is an activist investor that said, listen, your food quality started to stink. You did things like not put a little salt in the pasta water because it would deplete the life of the pots that you're using by 1 or 2 years, even though the quality of the food would go down without a little salting of the pasta, et cetera. Things like that. They were making stupid decisions. And you got to look at it and say, here's a 23-year-old that just totally broke down all of the problems of this business. And he happens to work for an investment firm, and he's liberating this company to go back to its roots of saying, that's right, we were cutting corners. We were doing things more for financial reasons and not to the benefit of the quality of our food. So
what's Carl's real reputation? What is he looked at from people in the industry? Because by all means, I think he kind of sprung into the limelight recently, at least in the tech
world, yeah. He scares the heck out of people. I've been around the Bay Area the last couple of weeks, and just yesterday speaking to a lot of younger startup founders, and they are horrified by him because, well, you got to remember, TWA was horrified by Carl Icahn. They literally didn't know what to do. This guy came in there and busted down the unions. That he completely changed the whole ecosystem of airlines. In fact, given rise to companies like Southwest, JetBlue, and even Virgin America to some extent. That's a good and a bad thing. I mean, the airline industry never really recovered from that turmoil between that and the fuel crises. So he's a fear factor. But again, you have to look at what he's doing. These are publicly traded companies. And ostensibly, the only reason they exist is to increase shareholder value, period. And it's like the law of the jungle. And you would say, no, what about customers? What about employees? That's not even in the top 10. The top 10 are increased shareholder value, period. So when a guy like Carl Icahn comes in, he challenges the board of directors and the corporate executive management to say, like what he's doing with Apple. He said Apple is undervalued and you have a lot of cash. So go out and buy your own stock. And if you do that, you take existing shares outstanding out of the market, and you, as the stock continues to rise, you are instantly creating new shareholder value. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. And to some degree, he's correct. And Tim Cook came out this morning and said, yes, Carl, we're already doing that. And historically, we're the largest buyback of stock in the history of any company. But Carl's premise is buy more.
So Carl carries the weight to get a direct response from the CEO of Apple.
Yes, because
53 million shares would do that for you, right?
Yeah. See, and not only that, you have to recognize there are people that are not as boisterous as Carl that are shareholders, and they just revel in the fact that they'll let Carl go out and use his reputation so they don't have to look like they're nasty. Let's just call it like CalPERS, for example, a huge union investment fund, and some of these other, blue label mutual funds. They don't want to go there and rattle the cages like Carl Icahn. But when Carl comes in there and does it, they're like applauding, because they know that if he's successful, that at least short term and maybe midterm, shareholder value is going to rise. But the problem with some of Carl's ideas is that it doesn't really play out necessarily well long term.
Is that because, it's interesting to note, he's almost 80 years old.
Yeah.
Do you think he's at a state now where his judgment is questionable? He's in it for the short term because of his limited lifespan, or at least business lifespan?
He's always been in it for the short term. He's always been in it for what can I get as a value in the next 2 years, maybe 3 years. Whereas if you're a really decent board and a really decent CEO, you're looking at least a 10-year plan if you're a reasonably good publicly traded company. And not a 5,000-year plan, but a 10-year plan. And so you take a step back and you say, okay, I'm of course here to maximize shareholder value, but I'm also here to build my market share. I'm here to serve my customers. And I'm here to make a great place for people to work. Whereas investors like Carl Icahn, they don't even care if they're making a good place to work. They're basically everybody's replaceable. It's the company's a brand, and we'll max out the brand, and if it dies, well, we'll sell before everybody else realizes it. It's really like that. So it's a give and take. Now, every ecosystem has to have a vulture, and I wish in a Bambi world there wasn't a vulture to go there and rip somebody's flesh from their carcass. But this is kind of what's going on, and it's, in my view, this is historic. We are seeing a transformation in the tech world that may precipitate the beginning of the bubble being exploded, in a sense, because with guys like Carl in the market now, or people following his footsteps, and very likely, even if he's not around, there'll be others that will start being more activist. The demands placed upon even new IPO'd companies are going to be tremendous. And all of these dreams that you have as a startup founder become irrelevant when you become a publicly traded company. All of a sudden, you're being told what to do by your board, pretty much directly.
So, yeah, that's interesting. Almost the short-term goal results in long-term failure. So he did call the split of eBay, PayPal.
He called it, and he probably precipitated it. He called Apple to be in payments. He was at least a year to 8 months saying Apple needs to be in payments.
Let's dig in PayPal, eBay a little bit. So pre-show, we were talking about the effects of that. eBay is a publicly traded company now. They split. What does the world look like? What's the opportunity?
Two companies. Yeah, so now you have...
down. Is PayPal going to get bought? Is eBay going to go out of business? Are they going to remain...
Yeah. Well, let me address that real quick. So, all right, eBay and PayPal will be two publicly traded entities, as I understand the current scenario, and you're going to see dramatically different dynamics taking hold. My suggestion to PayPal is to rename their company immediately, to do it at the time of the split, and let PayPal be a product and not be the company. I think that's important for future growth. And I hope Dan's listening, but that's the very first thing I would do. And I'm not saying that the PayPal brand is necessarily that bad. It's just you don't want to be tied solely to it. I would say the same for eBay. I would say eBay would rename their company into something else, and eBay would be one of the products of that company. That now gives both companies the opportunity to have much longer runways and more breathing room for innovation and doing other things. There's no doubt that the PayPal component is going to be orders of magnitude more valuable in the market. So immediately, anybody promoting the split would look genius because you're going to see the PayPal shares shoot to the moon.
So this would be a good buy. This is you're bullish on the PayPal.
I would buy eBay
stock
right now. I wouldn't put your entire farm on it, but I would buy it because just synergistically, both shares are going to rise, and you're going to get, my understanding, you're going to get equal shares in both companies. I don't know the mechanics of exactly how they're going to ratio shares, but it's going to be pretty darn close to that.
Talking about PayPal, what do you think about the leak that came out of the Facebook Messenger?
You mean, the pictures and everything, and
yeah, that was leaked by a Stanford undergrad, right? He found out on the beta build or through Xcode the
he went and looked at the actual images. Yeah, and this is phenomenal. And I think we're going to get pieces of why David is at Facebook, and I
think we already know why. I mean, we've put that to rest.
Well,
he's going to come and I mean, the CEO of Facebook has said so in an investors call that they will come into payments. It's something they will do it. They will do it right. They didn't give a date.
I also think why does it really matter that it's leaked? The word's kind of out. Like Apple did a great job. Like whether a few screenshots are leaked.
I mean, if you're going to hire a chef, of course you're going to be cooking something. So it's not like he's going to be
breaking some eggs, right?
Well, absolutely. So I think that's there. But I'm curious on your take if you think the Messenger app for P2P payments is going to compete with PayPal, and if so,
there's no doubt.
Well, to what extent? That's the question.
Well, payments is always a form of communication, right? It's never not been that way. And I've studied payments history down to Sumerian ring coin. Mm-hmm. And it's a form of highly targeted communication. So, when you're separating it and objectifying it like the way we do today, it doesn't really translate. It goes back to forms of communication. What happens is, the lowest common denominator effect, right? You have people who are living inside of Facebook, and it's effectively maybe even their operating system for their device or their computer. I mean, I know some, and now the trend is getting older, but I know some people who are so much in Facebook, they don't even know any other elements of their phone other than pressing answer and Facebook.
And not to mention the Messenger is an always on app.
Yes. So you have location, you have, who's around and stuff like that. I almost would say that you're going to be left with just two players. It's going to be Venmo, PayPal. It's going to be Facebook, and there's not going to be any other person-to-person opportunity.
Yeah, I saw there was I forget where I read this, but Venmo is releasing the BLE communication, so you can pay to someone around you, which I believe was a Square Cash initiative at first. I'm not sure.
Square did it, and that's getting, one of my criticisms of Square is don't go into a market that there's no chance for you to dominate. Don't waste your time. Don't even. I know it's cool. I know
the marketplace. I agree.
Yeah, the marketplace and pay with the Square Cash thing. All right. Google, you have three players that they have no chance of competing with. Google. Email attachments, that's simple. Facebook, it's clear they were going down that road. Faisal, just read Faisal 2 years ago and you would know it. and right, you don't even need to pay anybody. They should pay you, but they didn't. Should pay me too and Mike. But and then you got Venmo, PayPal, and you have to ask yourself, how could we possibly get to scale of 100 million, even to be having a chip in the game? They're never going to get to 100 million users ever. There's no chance.
All right.
So
but you have to understand 400 million. I don't know the number. I think it's close to 400 million for WhatsApp, which Facebook Messenger owns. Messengers, is a skewed number, but if you look at the Facebook user base of 1 billion, and obviously there's an overlap. surely 100 million is not that big of a target.
But
maybe 5 to 10 years down the line.
Anything Square does is going to be a rounding error to this. So it's a waste of precious time, resources, and energy, everything. So really, we're going to see two monsters and Google. I mean, Google is always going to be an X factor into this because Google's become such a peripheral player in payments. They sort of gotten bitten on the behind a few times, and now they're kind of looking at it saying,
could they buy a major company? Could they purchase PayPal?
Yeah.
Is Google, you think, so Brian calls Google purchasing PayPal?
No. Here's how I call it. I call PayPal doing exactly what, again, another Carl Icahn suggestion, and that is split the company and then have PayPal roll up the payments industry as much as they possibly can. And that sounds great. And people might say, how are they going to do that? Well, the new independent PayPal will have access to capital formation that historically has not existed before. And they could literally start buying up even bloatedly, overly valued companies.
So they themselves, do you think they will get purchased? Could Google come in? Like, is Google going to come in and purchase a large payment company? Or are they going to build it all internally?
I think that's almost inevitable, Google's been...
That's some long term.
Google's been on the trailing edge. It hasn't been on the... I mean, you think about payments, you'd say, yeah, sure, Google. How many people actually use a Google wallet? How many people really actively use it?
I pay Mike with Google because I can email attachment, but
but you don't use it anywhere else. I don't use it anywhere else.
No. It's situational, and that's what I'm saying about Facebook. The power of Facebook is that situational environment, and when you look at it between what Stripe has done with Facebook and obviously Twitter, and what David Marcus is going to do with person-to-person payments. What Venmo is going to be doing for person-to-person payments, you pretty much have the universe kind of squared off there, right? So now you go back into PayPal and say, all right, what are their procedures? Well, I'm predicting that they're going to acquire Square. I don't see any other exit for Square, and I know it might break some people's hearts, but I don't. When you have a company that's being valued now over $8 billion, and you're running into funding sources that are not your classic funding sources for these types of companies, and all the other things combined.
You sense a bit of desperation, right?
I think everybody does, and I'm really sorry to be saying that, but I mean there's no other way to look at it. So what would happen? Well, in a perfect world, PayPal or this new public entity that it was PayPal would acquire Square and keep the Square name. Square has spent billions of dollars building their brand name, and I don't think anybody would throw it away. So they would operate. I wouldn't say they would call their company Square, but it could very happen. I mean, we could wake up tomorrow and say PayPal acquired Square, and they're now calling themselves Square.
Sure. I mean, look at Venmo and Braintree. They both were acquired by, through one another.
Exactly.
PayPal. And Venmo has a fantastic brand, and you would never even know it, right?
You would almost even look at that acquisition and say, who really acquired who at that point?
I know. And know who won in the, well, I don't know if you say they won, but Excel, interestingly enough, invested in both Venmo and Braintree, and I believe PayPal. So
and PayPal, yeah.
When they sold for 26, it was kind of just, we just absorbed ourselves.
Yeah. And I think, I was at Sand Hill Road a couple of weeks back, and I was asked about this. This is before it was official that they were going to break apart. And I said, what do you think is going to happen? I go, this is going to happen. They looked at me like I was insane. Holy, you're telling me that Square is going to be a public company? Because he asked me, do you think Square will go public? I go, yeah, through an acquisition. How? PayPal. And they looked at me like they were going to get sick. And I go, hold on. This is probably what's going to happen. And
you know what's interesting is that Square had to go all the way across the world to get money.
Yeah.
I mean, they went to the Singapore Investment Authority. I was very surprised that it was the not Temasek, but the other authority, the Singapore. I forget what they call it, the GAC or something like that.
Yeah. It's well, I think when the history books are written, we're going to see the dynamics that caused this to happen. I got to say, one of my biggest criticisms about it is that the ethos of the government of Singapore does not resonate 100% with the ethos of the Silicon Valley. And I think Square has put itself in an unusual position for that. Everybody doesn't want to talk about it, and that's fine. I understand it's money and stuff. But, if you had a particular lifestyle in Singapore, that you had in San Francisco, you would not be a welcomed individual. And
no, it's a major. I lived in Singapore.
You know this. You know what's going
it's
on.
just it's much different. I fully don't understand why they would need to go to Singapore unless it's just a bridge round, and that's where the investors that you were able to close.
I mean, if you had to get it, you'd go to Kingdom Holdings or the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, companies that historically have invested in Silicon Valley. I mean, Kingdom Holdings, Prince Talal already has an investment in Twitter and God knows Uber and what have you.
To me, Faisal, you're right on. To me, that would be the go-to right at this point, right? Because they usually will bear the burden of these later investments and usually do fairly well. They exact a pound of flesh, of course. They want a lot more control as a final.
It's all about leverage, man.
So it's going to be an interesting time. But I see an independent PayPal as being a company that wants to acquire almost everybody of any value in the space. And I'm not saying that they're not going to innovate, but I believe that the idea of rolling up is going to
default to acquisition.
I want
to let's go ahead, Faisal.
Yeah, coming on to Marc Andreessen. What do you think about his comment? And let's just remind everyone about the comment.
Why don't you quote it?
I think Mike can do it best.
Let me see.
It's the earthquake in the financial system.
Yeah, I see Brian wrote a post about they can accept any form of payment that comes across the counter, including future ones, burgeoning ones like Apple Pay.
That's a Jack Dorsey quote, but the actual quote is at the top, and it's essentially what is it? Earthquake.
Well, the big part I got out of it was that there's going to be more change in the next 3 years in the banking industry than there was in the previous 20.
And I think that's almost an understatement. I mean, when Mark goes out and says this, I think a lot of people are reading it as like
Brian, give him a formal. I mean, give him not formal, but give him a response. I mean, I think it. Mark's not always right. He's the first one to admit that, but he is a loud voice, and he comes and kind of shakes things up. Do you agree with what he says? Where is he wrong?
I think he's absolutely right. I think the next 3 years there's going to be so much turmoil in the financial world. Certainly, Apple Pay has completely changed things. He sees it very clearly. And I can tell you just indirectly, he saw it very clearly. He was one of the few people on Sand Hill Road that pretty much understood 2 years ago that Apple was going to be involved with NFC and payments. I got to say that there were so many people that just did not want to buy into that. And I wouldn't say he was public about it, but I would say without speaking out of class, a lot of his investments were guided based on the idea that Apple would ultimately do what they're doing in payments, and he's going to prosper because of that. The investing concerns of VCs that didn't understand that, didn't read core maybe, they invested in companies that assumed that Apple Pay wouldn't be around, and this is going to cause them a lot of heartache. The other side of it is Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin itself.
Well, I think he understands, you have to understand that he does very well get it on the global scale of what's happening to banking, payments, especially politics, how politics is now affecting payments. And how
do you feel about it, Faisal? I mean, you see the Bitcoin part of this.
Well,
on a global scale.
I was speaking to the RBS guys, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and one of their investment bank side, and I asked him, "What do you think about Apple Pay?" Well, he had a very nice thing to say. He said, "Well, America, welcome to the world of payments." He says, I'm glad you guys are catching up. I said, well, it's not that Europe is so far ahead. He says, we are ahead. We are thinking, things that the U.S. doesn't have right now. For example, they always bring up their faster payment switches and so forth. Contact. I asked you, there's a question being circulated right now for the 8th mobile payments conference that's going to happen next month in Istanbul. Is NFC dead? And he says, my God, I mean, this is the question you're posing. Is NFC dead? The question should be asked: is contactless payments dead? It's much funny. More. It's much more than this. Just NFC. It's near proximity payments, and that's the word that we would like to use. So I think Andreessen, he really gets it, because from the Bitcoin perspective, what's happening in Russia, many people don't know this, but Russia just banned Bitcoin. It's outlawed.
Explore that with us. What do you feel about that? What's your instincts telling you? Is this politically motivated purely because of the tensions between America and?
Well, it's not like Bitcoin has an American flag attached to it. I mean, seriously, I think this is
what really?
This is a knee-jerk reaction gone horribly wrong. I think the ruble has been on the decline. Pretty steep. A lot of startups are now packing up literally overnight and getting the hell out of Russia because it carries a serious, gulag sentence, so to speak. And by the way, they are definitely going to make a case or showcase one or two companies getting arrested, people thrown in jail, etc., etc. Serbia just came out with a declaration that Bitcoin is not illegal. So I don't know what the Eastern Russians are doing. They should be adopting this thing with big, huge Russian bear hugs, not.
Why don't they? What is their core motivation for not?
I think the flight of capital is the main thing. I think the flight of capital, instilling fear that their currency and ruble. You need any government that operates needs to make sure that the citizens of that country have adequate security and, more importantly, faith in the currency of their land. Look at a classical example of Argentina. Argentina has $3 rates. One is the official rate, 8.4 something. One is what is called the blue dollar rate, which is the open market, or what we would call the curb rate, 12 point something. And then there's the BTC dollar rate, which is the Bitcoin dollar rate. And that's something like 16 point something. So if you look at the official rate versus the BTC rate, it's 85% almost more. So it's
funny. Quick aside before on the Argentina, we have a couple employees in Argentina, and they have to literally go to Uruguay. So last week, actually, they both left to go to Uruguay for a full day just to do banking. That's all they said. We have to go.
They've clamped it down. See when the economic, the classical economics, the classical solutions, the classical players will tell you, and classical I mean conservative, will tell you, put a fence around it. Stop everyone from doing this thing. You can't. In this digital world, how do you stop TCP/IP packet from going out? How do you? And here is where the Bitcoin comes in. We have found a way of putting value in that TCP/IP packet and shipping it across the world. The underground economies are going to thrive. Cash is going to thrive. It's going to lose. If you clamp it down, cash becomes a priced commodity. The value of that commodity goes up, provided there's no hyperinflation that sets in. Russia, I think, has done a monumental mistake because they feel their ruble is slipping. It has been slipping, and it's going to slip. And let me tell you, Bitcoin is not going to make much of a difference. It's not going to make any difference to their ruble. I mean, I don't see. If they were to embrace Bitcoin today or other altcoins, there wouldn't be a rising ruble. The ruble is falling because of the policies that they have, the fallout they have over the Ukraine situation and with the US and the EU sanctions that are coming up. That's why the ruble is falling. It's got nothing to do with Bitcoin. But why penalize
natural gas prices too, right? Natural gas, oil, and things like that.
So there are many other elements that are contributing to the fall of the ruble. But why penalize Bitcoin? They could have become a showcase of, an ideal economy, an ideal country to say, listen, here, we're going to embrace it. We're going to implement it within our payment systems, our new payment rails, et cetera, et cetera. They could have done what Poland was doing, 3 years ago and still is. Their own payment network, bypassing Visa and MasterCard, their own indigenous network. Pardon me?
Go ahead. I was curious, you think they would ever think about launching their own, like the Aurora coin in Russia? Could that be something
old school. Still a lot of old school over there. And I don't think so that's going to happen. I think, Russia is a pretty big economy. I think, no, I don't see that happening, no. Maybe some smaller country, but not Russia.
If they embraced, let's call it digital currencies, and made them a well-regarded, regulated part of their financial infrastructure, you would actually see the world gravitating to Russia and perhaps opening up more exchanges and things of that level. You would see really almost an incubator type of environment. And the direction they're going in at this point, at least substantively, as we read it today, and it could change, things are pretty dynamic over there, is that they're going in the opposite direction. And sooner or later, a country is going to see the value, let's call it a larger country. Now, with Germany having so many issues at this point, they may be one of the countries that go in this direction. They're going to see it as opening up for Wall Street. They're going to say that this is the future of financial markets, and if we don't embrace it, somebody else will. So let's get in early.
Well, look at what Fidor Bank is doing. Oh
yeah,
it's totally online. It's a community-based bank. Matthias was the CEO. He's embracing it. They've already implemented the Ripple protocol. I think that's a bank that understands how brick and mortar, how traditional banking and currencies are not going to hold it, how we need to digitize ourselves for the millennials who are now coming of age and so forth. And I think countries who don't innovate will get lost in complacency, will drown in complacency, and literally have their economies suffer. But then
Faisal, where is that bank? What's kind of the second tier?
Where is Fidor? It's German bank.
German bank, and they would you view them as one of the most progressive technology?
They have, for example, this is just an example. They have, let's say the rate of interest for borrowing is 6%, right? And let's say the cost to Fidor Bank for borrowing is 5.8%. Not the cost of borrowing, but let's say the 5.8 is the lowest that they will ever give the rate out. And let's say they published a rate at 6.4%. So Fidor has this unique speedometer, which has the lowest number is 5.8, the highest is 6.4, and the speedometer, the needle is hovering somewhere in between. Every 2,000 Fidor Bank customers who go and like their Facebook page and interact with it on a weekly basis, guess what? The rate of interest drops by 100 basis points.
Wow.
Community banking, but all digital. So they're thinking more than just traditional brick and mortar. This is what Moven is doing, Brett King and his Moven Bank. This is what Fidor is doing. And Fidor actually went and got a banking license. So it's not like they're sort of being encapsulated over a typical banking license, and they're offering the services on top like Moven is. No, they have their own bank. They're their own bank. So they're really, putting themselves out and innovating and thinking and say, well, how can we do this and how can we do that?
So once they develop a better system and they prove it, would you see a natural avalanche of banks move in their direction?
Well, so, and I have to give credit to Dave Birch and Brett King for this thing, and even Chris Skinner. They keep saying, 1/3 of U.S. college graduates who are now coming out, 1/3, they don't have a signature, a signature that you type on them. No, they just write their name as in their natural writing. They don't have a signature per se. They interact with the branch maybe once a year. Why once a year? Or maybe twice a year. Once to go and open the account, and second time maybe they forgot something and they had to revisit the branch again. Your account was locked out. But these people are coming of age. They know Facebook, they know Twitter, they know, Elo and what else, and Snapchat and, WhatsApp and Viber and Line. That's where they need banking and payments. And this is why why there's the whole, hoo-ha about. Everyone wants to bring it on the mobile phone. Why? Because these people are the ones who are going to be using it on the mobile phones. And the flip side is, the only common denominator in emerging markets like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kenya, Ghana, Liberia is the mobile phone. So again, the financial services have to be offered on that common denominator, which is the one thing that they carry with themselves, which could be a smartphone, but to a greater extent is a regular phone, So I think both sides of the river are saying, listen, it has to be the mobile technology. You have to get into payments, and payments itself is going to be defined. Is it going to be mobile? What will payments look like in 10 years from now, 2024? Will it be a mobile phone? Will it be variable technology? Will it be near proximity payments? It's a big question mark. No one knows where we're going.
I think all the above is probably going to take place, because if everybody has what we now consider a mobile device in the future, we're not even going to make a distinction. It's just going to be a device, and that's how we're going to connect. it makes a lot of sense to carry, especially if it's secured. And that's why Apple did so well with, doing biometrics early, securing the device before making it a payment device. That's why it was so logical, but it was hard for people to imagine because prior to Apple getting involved in biometrics, it was just assumed that a PIN or a passcode was enough. And to me, that's not enough. And encryption down to the core with secured enclave and secure element is extremely important. And, if we look at what happened in M-Pesa, there's a lot of implied security and a lot of it is not advanced technology, but it is actually more secure than carrying cash around. It's more secure than, using most banking facilities. And, you make such a great point about people visiting banks. I mean, I did a study where I was looking at how many people actually cross the threshold out, past the ATM machine and walk into the front door of a bank. And
never.
It's almost, if you look at it, it's 99.9% do not even want to go in there. They don't even know why.
The ones who do just go in for parking validation.
Yeah.
Really?
I remember watching this one day. It was 3 hours, and I had to get permission because otherwise I look like I'm casing the joint. And it doesn't help. I'm wearing sunglasses, a hat, and a trench coat. Nothing under it.
With a laptop outside,
with a laptop and with big antennas coming out. No. But this one woman was the only woman that went in the bank for 3 hours. Right. And this is in a reasonably mid-sized city in Orange County. And I asked her on the way out, I go, you mind if I ask you a question? Why'd you go to the bank? She goes, my ATM card didn't work. And that was the only reason. One of my clients
got locked out of their internet account, right? So entered the password incorrectly 3 times or 4 times, got locked out. Call the bank up, call center. Hi, I'd like to reset it. I provide you all my credentials. This is sorry. You have to physically come to the branch, validate yourself, and only then. She says, are you kidding me? I have to go 25 miles to downtown just to come to a specific branch, and she had to
What
do
year
it.
was that?
This is 3 days ago.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Man, I have USAA, and the USAA has no physical locations. And if you want to deposit a check that's over 5,000, under 5,000 you can do it in your phone. Over 5,000 you go to any UPS store, and they partnered with UPS to have the mobile check scanning devices. They just check your ID and make sure it's you.
You look at it. So one of my things is, why do we even need a card number? What happens when biometrics gets global enough and unique enough to generate a number?
Now you're talking about Mark of the Beast here, Faisal.
So just that. Why even have a 16-digit number?
Yeah.
Or it's the physical card. American Express. I'm not going to tell you, but it's a Norwegian company that's consulting for them. They're having a hard time telling their they're really high-end customers that this platinum card that we have, this titanium card that we have, it's just something to make an ass out of you, honestly. It's just because you feel good that you want something physically in your hand because you're from the old school. It's going away.
It's going away like CDs and Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. So
8-track tapes.
Blockbuster videos, remember? Rewind or get fined.
Yeah, rewind or get fined, right? You're absolutely right. And there, but if you look at what Apple did with the way cards are loaded into Apple Pay, it's full branding. If you look at it, just think of any image you have of Apple Pay and you remember that you're looking at a credit card, either it's the Chase card or the Bank of America card, and it's full on color screen branding of the card. That's the future. You won't get the card; you'll get the branding sent to your smart device.
I get that, but what I'm saying is, look at the way the Bitcoin wallets are now.
Oh yeah.
If we all decided on QR codes, that's not even a number. To me, that's just like a graphical representation of a number. We have multiple wallets. Do we really need those 4-digit codes? Do we really need PCI DSS? Do we really need that card holder data? We need them because the 2 biggest companies, card schemes in the world, are telling us so. But
Well,
I think they'll be challenged somewhere down the line. They will be challenged. It may not be in the next 5 to 10 years or 20 years, but they will be challenged on this thing.
If you look at the breach that this took place at Chase Bank, which is one of the, I think, the largest breaches in history when it comes to financial institutions, I'm surprised it's so downplayed, but it's worse than the Target breach.
70 million, right?
Yeah, and we're talking people who have mortgages, all kinds of financial data.
What was compromised? Was the credit cards?
No, it was the entire network.
The personal data. So they're not even sure what went out. They're not even sure.
But we're talking about ID, fraud that's going to come from this, and blackmail. People knowing about your financial state that realistically only a computer knew. Now it can be utilized for different scams and operations. So what we're entering now is, I think, slowly but surely, all of us are going to want assured guarantees that everything we do is encrypted. And Apple, again, is on the forefront of that. They say, well, we don't know where you're going, what you're doing, and how much you're paying. And I think we're going to start seeing more of a theme that way, where you're not the product and your purchasing and buying behaviors are not the product unless you explicit give permission under a limited frame and scope.
I agree. There's a saying out there that I read today. It says, let's make the internet where privacy is not an option, but a standard.
Yeah. And it would actually do away with all this. Like, for example, there's no reason to have unencrypted data at any bank ever. Everything should be encrypted 100% going into a hard drive, out of a hard drive. The only reason a breach is of any value is because there was no encryption. There were walls, there were firewalls, and the ages of the firewall is dead.
You could get into any bank's computer, any network. If you put a thumb drive on the parking lot and wrote confidential on it, someone's going to pick it up and stick it in their computer. They are. And if not, they're going to stick it into their neighbor's computer.
That's a pretty cool trick.
No, you put
I do it all the time, Faisal.
4chan Snapchat images.
Yeah. So I didn't tell you guys this, but I it just sort of slipped my mind. But yesterday, President Obama was in town and he held a event, sort of informal event.
At your apartment?
Not at our apartment, right down the street though. At Cross Campus, there's this it's a startup area or a startup office, and it had a few hundred people in there. So got a chance to meet him, and he touched on security as being one of the core problems in the banking industry. I mean, among other things, he didn't spend too much time on it, but I know he had a public release around the J.P. Morgan Chase data breach, and admitting that this is something that he fears and.
Well, you're talking about
the
most guarded, secure president of the world, and someone skipped the fence and rode the elevator with him. I mean, so if that's the state of affairs of the physical security of one of the most guarded person on earth, you can imagine where our financial systems are today.
Well,
as a side note, though, like seeing him in person, it was amazing to me how calm and cool he was, and interested in all the little startups that are unfunded, less than a year old. And then he goes and he probably has a meeting with Egypt or ISIS, and just handles just his ability to switch on and off. It was amazing to see. No signs of stress, totally cool. And he was like that before he announced the any major war decisions, anything. He's a really special guy. You could tell just from his presence.
Yeah, it's a rare individual that can handle that job, and even the ones that are quote unquote the best of the worst. I mean, they're by far, probably 1/8 to be able to handle the stress and the information that none of us know.
Guys, a quick question: what do you think about the price drop that Bitcoin experienced in the past couple of days?
I think it has a lot to do with people taking profit. I think if you look at it, some of the big mining operations, I believe there was 20,000 Bitcoins that were sold at 300?
26,000.
Yeah. This was, there's no doubt that's not an investor. That's a miner. That was somebody that's been mining for a very long time. And I can also say, probably confirm that indirectly by people I know in the mining community. And you have to recognize the fact that they were mining when Well, there's a chance. Yeah, Butterfly is in a lot of trouble.
But they're sort of coming out of it, because I think now the Commerce Department or whoever it is that is put the injunction on them are saying, first release your goods, start paying off. There's now shipping their machinery out. But 26,000. Wow.
Give a little background here. So the Butterfly.
Butterfly was shut down. Yeah. Because the consumer, consumer division of the country here. Basically, the consumer affairs essentially felt that they were running a scam operation, and there's a good chance that they were. And here's one of the things that were alleged.
Give a quick background for people who don't know about.
Okay,
Butterfly.
So Butterfly Labs is a mining hardware company, and they were one of the first really good solid. I got a lot of Butterfly Labs equipment and their first generation products. Games came to the market very quickly. They weren't perfect. They didn't run none of the Bitcoin mining equipment is perfect and runs like it as advertised, but earned a lot of miners a tremendous amount of money when the difficulty of Bitcoin was relatively low, and you could, in some cases, earn a Bitcoin a day on Butterfly Labs devices. So they had an okay reputation, and then as time moved on, they were taking longer and longer to deliver. Now, in the mining community, you have to prepay to buy equipment in hopes that when it is finally delivered, that the difficulty and the price of Bitcoin is relatively stable enough where you're going to get a return on your investment. The equipment that Butterfly Labs will now deliver after almost a year delay on some of these pre-orders, people gave Bitcoin to buy it and they can't get the money back, is going to be almost like an expensive heater. You're not ever, unless Bitcoin prices start going back to the $1,000 range and the difficulty doesn't skyrocket, you'll never get a return on investment. And an 800 gigahash, an 800 gigahash or 500 gigahash card, which sold for $3,000, will never generate $3,000 unless Bitcoin really goes up. But that's what they're officially delivering.
And they also have there's allegedly they were using their own equipment for mining rather than shipping it out.
There's a great deal of evidence in that. And so essentially what they were doing is they, quote unquote, were burning it in. But what they were doing is they were collecting the Bitcoins that they were burning in on. And by virtue of turning on all of that equipment that miners paid for in advance, they were increasing the difficulty, thereby by that action alone, they were making that equipment that much less valuable when the miners finally got it to plug it in. So there's evidence that suggests that was going on a massive level. That's double dealing. It also turns out that one of the founders had been involved in some kind of online lottery scam, and that didn't bode well. He was also barred by a prior court order not to collect funds in advance, and that was violated. So it doesn't look good. But I think in this process, there's certainly a lot of Bitcoins in the control of people that were either directly or indirectly related to Butterfly Labs. And there's a lot of insiders that believe that sale that took place at 300 was either them or some miner or miners that said, hey, I made a lot of money. I mined when this was $70 or when it was $20. And, I want to, buy Alibaba stock or something.
What about the conspiracy theory that the FBI is also holding on to a lot of Bitcoins? They could have been...
there's a good chance that they are. But, if their job is to maximize the value to the government, they wouldn't want to see it depleted. If their job is to destroy Bitcoin, it wouldn't destroy Bitcoin. It would just temporarily lower its value. So, game theory would suggest that, if anybody held a lot of Bitcoin, it would be in their best interest for the currency to rise, not fall.
But anyone who's been following it was pleasantly surprised. It went down to, I think the lower floor was about 297 or something.
Well, I've actually had some friends that bought in at 270.
Okay.
I told everybody I know that if it goes below 300,
and all 26,000 got gobbled up. All of it.
Yeah, take 10%. If it goes below 300, take 10% of your income and buy as much as you can.
Let me ask you, Brian. I'm curious, or Faisal. I think one of the systemic problems with Bitcoin that people have expressed is that the fluency or liquidity of Bitcoin is more viewed now as value store than actual purchasing utility. In an increase or effort to increase that, would Apple Pay release, or have they thought about putting Bitcoin as an option? Before the show, we talked a bit about Disney and how they have their early hardware pieces out there in Orlando, Florida, their largest facility, to accept Apple Pay. Could they easily, or is that a major change way down the road, or is this something short term where they have Bitcoin as an option sitting right next to your American Express or your Visa card?
It's inevitable.
Well, it's inevitable, but I have a question. What purpose does a regular consumer in the U.S. have by paying by Bitcoins?
None.
I mean,
it's an asset class of an investment. Right now, I view Bitcoin primarily in the U.S. unless you're doing repatriations.
It makes a lot of sense for someone in Zimbabwe, right? It makes a lot of sense for someone in Rwanda, in Zaire, in Bangladesh, in Maldives, in Argentina. Classical example in Russia. But
even China.
Even China. But for someone in the U.S., where accessibility to portable or digital cash is so prevalent out there, so ingrained in their wallets, digital or physical, it makes no sense. They'll probably just do it just for the novelty purpose of it.
It's novelty. I've asserted for the longest time the killer app for digital currencies is nano and micro transactions.
Yeah,
and when we get about the business of really getting involved in that, that's where it's going to be transformative. Apple's going to embrace digital currencies, of course, and we'll see it used in different types of settings. But, getting to Disney has been telegraphing the future of payments for quite a long time. I mean, they obviously have an Apple connection. Steve most certainly was an influence via the Pixar merging of Disney and Pixar. He was on their board and helped guide them. And when I was in Orlando this past week actually, I got to see Apple Pay used at Disney properties to such a level that it was mind-blowing.
So what was it like? Are you walking around? Are you seeing signs for it all over the place, or how do you?
No official Apple Pay branding, because this is a test and it's not officially released. And
so you were testing for Apple Pay?
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, not officially for Apple, but let's just say some interested parties.
Off the record?
Well, this is officially off the record. I never said this, but
yeah, we won't record this to publish it. We promise.
Yeah, let's just exit that now. But realistically, it was a fully functioning iPhone 6, and it was amazing because Disney's already set up for it. I mean, they created something called the Magic Band, which essentially is an NFC device along with an RFID distant device. I think it's 20 feet. So in one little band, you can essentially do a number of things. Number one, you can open up your hotel room door with it. You can pay for things. But this is the element where I think startup people and the startup community would really find fascinating. All right, so Disney made a lot of money back in, let's say, the 1990s and 1980s, taking pictures of people and even developing film. Like, let's look at the 1980s. I mean, there's still vestiges of this. It's kind of comical. All of these little booths that say film developing and buy film here. It's just, some of those are etched in stone on one of these entrances on Epoch Center. It was like, wow, there's not even any film to be bought in that store anymore. So what does Disney do in a world where everybody's got a camera in their pocket? Because back in the 80s, you would have to really pick your photos because you were paying for them to get developed. And, the average person going to Disney, a Disney person rep told me this last week, would take between 45 and 60 photographs, period, and that's it, for their entire 10-day vacation. And Disney went around becoming the cameraman for these families. And of course, they wanted to sell that back. It was a huge revenue source. In the 80s, it generated about between 1.5% to 2% of the revenue streams were from photographs. at Disney properties. That evaporated. Now, it sounds like a small amount, but it was significant. It employed hundreds of people. So here we are in the digital age. How do you make it relative? Well, of course, they're now giving you digital images that you can download. But the beauty with the Magic Band is every single ride, if you buy the photo, I think it's called the Disney Photo Experience or something, every single ride that you go on, you know those funny pictures when you're going down the they automatically know they know it's you because of your Magic Band, and you get within seconds you get to log in on your phone or the website.
Wow, that's cool.
And you get to see your picture and you own it, and you can have it printed up, you can have it sent, you can tweet it out with backgrounds. So, you know, my family was there. My son was having his 6-year-old birthday, coincided with all this. So we have.
So could your son wear this band? I mean,
yes.
Could they open up the market to essentially triple the number of consumers in Disney World by providing children with bands that they can
Let me tell you how powerful it is. They would actually know his name when he walked up to the.
And they ask him, "Do you want to pay $25 for the soda on your dad's credit card?"
Yes. Well, yes. Disney dollars, remember?
Disney dollars, all funny money. You know, but the ride would. There was one ride in Epoch Center that actually said his name when he walked up. It was really quite interesting. The Disney characters have some kind of. I'm assuming a Google Glass on, and when you walk up to them. You know, the ones that do talk, but have masks on, because not all Disney characters will talk, actually will say your name. And it's pretty amazing. So anyway, the future, imagine if everybody with permission were able to broadcast certain signals out to the world. Now, I would call this the Uber or the Lyft of photos, right? So when you go to Disney, your photos are being taken for you. What would the world be like if we would broadcast the signal out and others can do similar types of things, their businesses? And I think, Mike, pre-show you talked about going to concerts and friends going to concerts where they would have all-inclusives based on a similar device they were wearing on their arm. I think our smartphones, ultimately the Disney people know that the Magic Band is ultimately going to go away with iOS devices. They're just going to use BLE and NFC and ride on the back of that because they don't really want to get involved in it.
It sure does show you the potential to just explode the economy, though, or explode the buyer's economy.
It's a beautiful experience. I would tell anybody that they want to see the future of where Apple Pay is going,
go to
3, 4, 5.0. Go to Disney and really observe because it's not very obvious. And they're testing new stuff right now that is definitely going to be part of Apple Pay, what I would think Apple Pay 5. And that's awesome. It's magical.
Word of advice for everyone there. Check out Disney for the future.
Before we wrap up, though, I want to hear about your mountain climbing expedition.
Oh, yeah. So I climbed Mount Whitney this weekend, 14,475 feet, tallest mountain in the continental United States. Apparently there's some mountain up in Alaska that I have to keep saying continental. But yeah, it was great.
Is it Denali?
I think it is Denali, yeah. There might be a couple that are taller. But yeah, we left at 12:30 with headlamps on, and we hiked through the night for 6.5 hours and caught the sunrise at the top. It was incredible.
How do you do that?
Again,
do you ask permission, or you just say,
Whitney is extremely popular. There's about 225 people who hike it every day. There's only about 20 that do it in one day, like we did. The rest do it 2 days, and they sleep at base camp, which is at about 11,000 feet, and they'll go up the second day. But yeah, it's crowded. Coming down in the afternoon, we probably passed by a good 150 hikers. So it's fun to do at night. It's pretty intense, though. There's
everybody was vertical or some horizontal hikers coming out. I mean,
you really can only
scary, right?
What's funny is there's cell phone reception at the top, so it was my parents' anniversary at that day. So I called them from the top of the point. And they didn't even know I was going to do it because, they probably advised me against it if they knew beforehand. But
was there a Verizon guy saying, "Can you hear me now?" Up
yeah.
Well,
seriously, how did they get cell phone reception?
I don't know. I think it was just just the way it worked out. I'm not sure if there was a relay. There was a little hut that could have been a relay for emergency purposes, or just the fact that you're exposed. So there's, communication up there.
Yeah, like being in an airplane, right?
Yeah.
So would you recommend somebody healthy, young to
Yeah,
to
definitely. The key is acclimation. So you have to get, I mean, I live, 10 blocks from the beach. So you have to get acclimated. So going up to 10,000, 11,000 feet, at least the night before, hopefully 2 nights before to get used to it really helps. Otherwise it's impossible. It's just, the altitude change is too much.
What is it? Nauseousness, headaches?
Nauseous. It feels like a slight hangover in the morning is kind of what you feel like. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one day, who knows, we'll be hiking over in Faisal's part of the world where the real mountains are.
Oh, those are real mountains, yeah.
Well, gentlemen.
Yeah, it was good.
It's good.
Yeah, really enjoyed this one.
Talk next week. Have a good one.
Ciao.
Yeah, take care. Bye.